Okay, we'll get going here. Call the regular meeting of Township Council for Monday, May 1st to order. Of course, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, our valued relationships with the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo First Nations. So with that, I'll get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda. Moved by
Just before we do it, I'd like to move the removal of P2.
So we'll get the adoption on the floor, and then I think I heard about that, so I'll come back to you. So moved by Councillor Ferguson. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Kuntz. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, no, in this case, since it's been moved and seconded, Ms. Bauer, I believe now it's required that it's an amendment to the agenda. Okay, so then I'd move an amendment to the agenda that we remove P2.
You want to withdraw P2?
Correct.
Okay, just let me find it here. Make sure I got the page 17. So okay, so that's amendment to withdraw P2, moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Kuntz. Is there any discussion? Just to open that up. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that. That carries unanimously. Back to the adoption motion as amended. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question on the A1. Carries unanimously. Adoption of minutes from the regular council meeting of April 17th. Motion, please.
Yep.
Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Martins. Any discussion on B1? Seeing none, I'll call the question on B1. And that carries unanimously. Move on to delegations. Diane Kask, please come forward. You need no introduction, so, but just in case for some members of the audience, go ahead and introduce yourself and where you reside.
Diane Kask, and I live in Aldergrove.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Honorable Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I understand the need for increased housing. People need a place to live that is affordable. Part of the need to have a place to live is to give people quality of life. Densification in Langley has changed the quality of life in Langley and promises to do this even more. While mixed-use buildings where residents live upstairs and go downstairs to buy food, clothing, stop for coffee, and have a short walk to a rapid transit is convenient, building these developments too closely together can lead to extreme safety risks, both physically and mentally. People need trees. The 330-300 principle is essential to good health. From their home, residents see 3 trees, there is 30% canopy cover, and green spaces within 300 meters, an easy walking distance. A PhD candidate at UBC, Tara Brown, whose study into forest bathing I was part of, sent me information taken from studies. Unfortunately, I will not have time in my 5 minutes to read all of the information and references that she sent me. But I will read some of it and hope that you will take the time to read her information that I've attached to your copy of this presentation. Urban environments can significantly negatively impact mental and physical health due to limited nature contact, pollution, traffic, and noise. As Canada's population becomes increasingly urbanized, addressing health issues related to the urbanization is becoming more critical. Promoting access to green spaces and incorporating nature-based interventions in public health strategies can benefit individuals in Langley and other urban areas. One such initiative is the BC Parks Foundation's PARX program, where health professionals prescribe nature to improve health and well-being. Trees in particular play a vital role in enhancing the health and well-being of urban residents in Langley. They provide numerous benefits such as improving air quality by filtering pollutants, reducing heat island effects by providing shade and cooling, and promoting mental health by offering aesthetically pleasing and calming environments. Trees also contribute to noise reduction, support biodiversity, and encourage outdoor physical activity and social interactions. Municipalities in Canada, including Langley, can work towards providing accessible, high-quality natural spaces to residents driven by concerns about environmental sustainability or climate change adaptation and mitigation. In designing spaces, it is crucial to ensure that socioeconomically deprived communities have equal access to high-quality natural areas to prevent health inequalities. Addressing urbanization-related health issues is increasingly crucial for Langley. By promoting access to green spaces and incorporating nature-based interventions into public health strategies, these areas can experience significant improvements in residents' mental and physical well-being. Local governments and organizations should collaborate to create, maintain, and enhance accessible green spaces, ensuring that all communities have equal opportunities to reap the health benefits. By fostering a strong connection to nature, these efforts will contribute to a healthier, more sustainable, and more resilient urban environment for Langley and Lower Mainland residents. Another concern that I have is to change all power in buildings to electricity. Anyone that has had electricity go out for a few days after a storm knows the devastation of what this can do for their food supply and worry over freezing babies. In the past, people have been able to go out and sit in a car to warm up, but if your car is also electric, there will be no way of recharging it. Or, if you don't have a car, how will you warm up? Everyone remembers the heat dome in 2021 that killed the elderly that did not have access to cooling systems. Before council allows electricity in new developments, they also need to investigate alternative forms of heating and cooling homes to have as a backup, and not allow developers to install a cheap electric system in developments without a backup from a different power source, perhaps solar. Another density concern was shown in Langley during the fire of the 6-story wooden structures under construction on 208th at 80th Avenue on April 19, 2021. When buildings are built too close together, the risk of fire spreading is increased. I do understand that once a building is completed, it has a fire-resistant exterior and a sprinkler system. However, the close proximity of buildings would make it difficult for fire trucks and crews to quickly and safely attack a blaze. Also, the fire-resistant exterior does not provide a guarantee of stopping the fire from spreading. The new plan, 200 Street 2040, threatens to increase the mental and physical risk to residents. Increasing the density to put in rapid transit while increasing the mental and physical risk to residents makes absolutely no sense. I have even heard talk of taking away balconies so that buildings can be built less expensively, and it's better to reduce climate change. Doing this will severely affect people's ability to grow anything on their balcony or conveniently get outside and enjoy any fresh air that is left. All of you on council have had the opportunity to live in an area with trees and open spaces. I do understand that single-family home is being threatened not only by you, but also by provincial legislation. You have the opportunity to insist on the 330-300 ruling of trees within developments. I am not against the 200 Street 2040 plan, but it is, as well as all development, needs to be implemented in balance. Keep trees, keep space, allow for sunlight into homes, allow for an alternate power source for safety in times of extreme heat and extreme cold. Do this along with density and affordable housing to build a strong township of Langley. Just a side note, page 16 of the 200 Street 24 document shows a cross-section of the ultimate 200 Street corridor. It is very dangerous and does not lend itself to pedestrians and bicycle safety. A much safer plan would be to separate the bike lanes from cars. Also, to have side-running bus lanes, rather than having parents with young children getting off the bus in the middle of traffic on both sides. Thank you for considering my presentation.
Yeah, I'll give you a bit more time there, so I appreciate that. Appreciate the thoughtfulness and the time you put into that. Is there any other questions? Seeing none from council, thank you very much for that, and I have that in writing as well, right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next delegation, C2, Dr. Paul Simonin. Did I guess that correctly?
Close.
Close?
Simonin. Yeah.
Simonin.
Thank you. Put this up here.
Yeah, go ahead, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to Mayor and Council for hearing me today. My name is Paul Simonin. I have a master's in watershed science and ecological economics and a PhD in fisheries science, and currently work as the National Science Director with Arasha Canada, based out of our Environmental Center and live and work there on the border of Langley and Surrey, downstream from where we are here, and downstream from Horn Pit, which I'd like to share a little bit about our knowledge of today. So I'm here today because the area known as Horn Pit, and in particular, not long ago, the area looked something like this, and recently, it now looks something like this. And as the council knows, the Little Campbell, or Tataloo, runs right through this stretch of town of Langley, right near Horn Pit. And our organization is a conservation organization that is based just downstream of this area, and in particular has been working on a number of studies throughout the Tataloo Little Campbell watershed for the past 20 plus years. So today I wanted to share a little bit about what we know of the limited knowledge of hydrology in the area where the river goes dry in this particular place, and also what we know about salmon spawning and fish presence in this area to encourage the council to make the right decision moving forward with this particular place. So the river, Tataloo River, goes dry for 3 to 5 months each year in this particular part that is in dotted red on the screen on the map here. We've been studying the river and this particular event for a number of years, and over the past 5 years, roughly from June to October, the past year, say we had a wet spring, so it went dry in July, but then stayed dry until November. This section of the river goes dry. And there's kind of two take-home messages from this fact. The first is that the Tataloo is a stressed river. I'm going to alternate between saying Tataloo, traditional name for the river, and Little Campbell River. Tataloo is a stressed river. So I've heard it said that this river is a gem of the lower mainland, and the implication being that the little cumulative effects will still result in a beautiful place. And to some extent that may be true, but I'd also suggest that gems are fragile. You knock a gem the wrong way and the whole thing shatters. And some of the evidence that we have suggests that this particular area is an important place hydrologically and in terms of habitat within the area. Spawning and rearing habitat for fish, which I'll get into a little bit more. And this habitat over the last 5 years we've monitored dries up at various times of the year. Thousands of salmon have needed to be moved. That's been a partnership between our organization, DFO, Hatchery, and other partners in the region, Langley Environmental Partners Society, among others. And it's an expensive effort and a large effort. The second aspect, in addition to emphasizing that this area drying up is evidence of the stress on the river already, is that during these months of the year where the river is dry, it begins to flow again immediately downstream of the wetlands at Horn Pit. There's very limited hydrological studies that have been done in this area. We don't know exactly where all the water is moving, but we do know that the river begins to run again at that place. So functionally, in terms of overland flow, water moving on the surface, this area at Horn Pit functionally serves as the headwaters of the Tataloo Little Campbell River for 3 to 5 months of the year. Variety of information in the province, obviously, about fish in this area. This is a quote from the DFO Fisheries Act from 2019. Cumulative effects must be considered in decision-making about harmful alteration, destruction, and disruption of fish habitat and pollution of fish-bearing streams and watercourses. The image in the background here is of a fish that is endemic to 11 streams in the lower mainland, and it's also in the top left of this image, a Salish sucker. We also have prickly sculpin and 3-spine stickleback in this image. These say National Geographic Photo Arc on them. They are photos that were taken of fish from the Little Campbell River at our Brooksdale Environmental Center by National Geographic, simply highlighting some of the unique species found in this particular area. As we know, the Little Campbell River is also a salmon-bearing river, Class A salmon river. Returns per year for Chinook, 400 to 800 fish. Coho, chum, steelhead, and cutthroat also use this stretch of the river, and in particular, the stretch of spawning habitat that is immediately downstream of Horn Pit and within the stretch that now dries up. There's also limited spawning of pink and sockeye salmon throughout this stretch of the river on occasion. Over the last year or so, we've begun a larger study with partners within the watershed of Chinook salmon. Boundary Bay Chinook salmon populations designated as threatened over the last couple of years. There's very little known about it and little known about wild reproduction, except that it happens in this particular stretch of the river. The river near Horn Pit, take-home message, is important to Chinook salmon and other salmon species. I don't know if it went dark in anyone else's screen, but this one, that's all right. Sure. So I'll pause a second, but we've begun a Chinook salmon study tagging salmon to learn more about their habitat use and movement for this Boundary Bay population over the last few years. All right. So I'm going to wrap up here, but again emphasize that this stretch of the river is one of the most important for salmon spawning in this area. And as a general recommendation, we strongly recommend that leadership ensures natural functioning hydrology in this area and wild salmon runs. And I'm conscious that natural functioning hydrology is a vague, broad term. We need to first understand what the hydrology is of the site, how it functions, what do we mean by natural, and how do we ensure that this part of the river stays as it is or improves even in terms of our stewardship and care for this particular place. I see the fish on the back wall of this room, and Arasha is excited to continue to tell the story of this place around the world. We work in about 20 plus countries, and we want that story to be one of continuing salmon runs, continuing hope for this place, and these murals in the back of the room certainly suggest that I think you do also. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I have some questions from council.
Thanks.
Councilor Richter, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Simonin. I have a couple of questions. Your first picture that you put up where you said Horn Pit looked like this not long ago.
Yeah.
What is the date that picture was taken?
Yeah, I was looking through different aerial imagery that we have. That's about 2018.
2018, okay. And then subsequent slide that you've got up shows where the river goes dry for 3 to 5 months each year.
Right.
And you've got dates there on the following slide dating from 2018 to 2022.
Right.
So did the river just start drying up after 2018?
It's a good question.
was
I was
clear?
trying to look into that before meeting here today too. It's my understanding that it did not start in 2018. It has been dry before then, which is why my general take-home message was not that Horn Pit causes the river to dry up, but that this is evidence that the river is already under stress in this particular place. I think it's very safe to say that more trees equals more water infiltration. Yeah. And so the clearing, I think it's very safe to say, even though we haven't studied it, has not helped the fact that the river dries up in that area. But the ongoing periodic drying is evidence of stress throughout the watershed.
Yeah, and it's clear from one of your photographs where it shows the river going by the cleared area that the river is very close to the edge of that cleared area.
It's very close to the edge, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I was just wondering if there was a correlation between that and the fact that it's drying up maybe sooner?
I think it's safe to say there's probably a connection. It's also safe, we haven't studied it, and I think there needs to be a lot of better understanding of where the water's moving through that area before further changes happen. It used to be forested in that particular corner, as was shown on that earlier image.
Yeah.
And certainly that better retained moisture within the soil, better collected moisture in the vegetation that was there, and retained it to improve flow in that place.
Okay. And my last question is, I understand that Arosha works fairly closely with the First Nations in the area. Mm-hmm. And how is their access to fish being affected? I guess, well, the Campbell River flows down through to the sea at White Rock. Mm-hmm. Are they losing catch right now? Or
Semiahmoo First Nation is right at the mouth of the Tataloo River and relies on food fish as much as possible is I think the best way to say it. So they have food fish allowances that are guided by a variety of factors. I don't know the numbers of fish that they catch, they use salmon of all the species that I mentioned as a traditional food source.
Okay.
And I considered putting in a little bit more about our partnership with them. We work very closely with them on a variety of watershed-related issues, including water quality and quantity throughout the watershed. I can't claim to speak for them, but I know that they feel strongly about wise stewardship for this watershed and have been strong advocates for that goal throughout previous decisions and throughout other issues within the watershed.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Kunst, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I was curious about the fish salvage efforts. What's involved with that, and how often does that occur?
Yeah, what's involved with it is periodically we've monitored the dry stretch of the river to see if there's pools. So the river just doesn't obviously automatically, one day it's all dry. It slowly disconnects and there's pools that form. So we've monitored it to see where young salmon are in those pools and when that habitat is shrinking so much that they're not going to be able to survive due to either temperature or oxygen. Warmer water can't hold as much oxygen for them. So what's involved is us or other partners who've noticed that, folks from the hatchery or other groups, getting in touch with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and then many people going in with seine nets, so like a long net you stretch across the river and kind of wrap around the juvenile or the young salmon that are there, collecting them, putting them into buckets that are cold enough with enough water, and then moving them. I believe they've mostly been moved downstream to near where the hatchery is, but downstream to an area where there's enough flow.
So obviously that happens all along the Little Campbell River, not just in that area, but all along the river.
To my knowledge, that's the main area where salvage operations have had
Oh,
to
is that
happen.
right? Okay.
Yep, that is the main area that goes dry.
Okay.
Upstream from there's water within the wetlands, within Campbell Valley Park, for instance. It gets more stagnant and shallower, but doesn't completely dry.
Okay.
So that's the main area.
Thank you.
Great. Seeing no other questions, and thank you again for that submission. And Ms. Bauer, I'm going to make sure if you could have that presentation slide deck emailed to all members of council, please. Again, appreciate the submission, and the conversation around that will officially start on May 8th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I have one more. Did you mean to? Oh, right, sorry. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on here to reports to council. E1, 2023 capital improvement and community grants. And just before we get going, I'd like to get a motion, please, to accept the recommendation that's here in the agenda. And if there's probably a series of amendments, we'll slow it down and we'll do those one at a time. So I'll get a motion, please, to move recommended. Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Martins. And Councillor Martins, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. As you were mentioning a few items, I have 4.
You have 4, okay. So again, to slow this down, I'm sure we're gonna have a few, so why don't you just do one at a time? We don't need to list them all in advance, just we'll start to go through them.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to staff for preparing this report. I can see a lot of work and effort went into reviewing all the applications. My first point would be under Section A, Capital Improvement Grants on page 7. Item A4, the Langley Arts Council, their project being the Aldergrove Kinsman Community Center purchase of plinths.
Okay.
I notice in this category, they are eligible for up to 50% of the project value. This is the only one that in the list that didn't receive the full 50%. So I would like to see if we can, I agree with the recommended amount, but increase it to $3,237.50, which would then be the 50%.
Okay, so you're moving that. Ms. Bauer, you have some of these. We'll slow it down as you need, but you think you have that one? Do you have that? I'll get a seconder to that.
Yes, Councillor Martin forwarded the
She
amendments
did
prior.
okay,
Yes.
so I didn't get that, so that's great that you have them. Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Is there any discussion on that increase? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question on E1, First Amendment. And that carries unanimously. So Councillor Martins, go ahead, you had another one.
Thank you. Yeah, this is actually 2 categories combined. So on page 11 of the report, Section D, Community Grants, Major Festivals.
Okay.
Yeah, so item D2 is for the Fort Langley Jazz and Arts Festival Society for their festival, a recommended amount of $10,000. My understanding is that this particular event receives funding from other sources and is already quite well resourced. I would like to see this $10,000 reallocated to Section H, the community grants, the dry grads.
Dry grads,
For the
okay.
8 secondary schools. So right now, each school recommended amount is $250. So if we take the $10,000, divide it by the 8 schools, that's an additional $1,250 for each school. So that will give each dry grad
Yeah. So that'll increase the dry
$1,500.
grad funding to $12,000, paid for with a reallocation of that grant. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on that? Councillor Kuntz, go ahead.
Yeah, from what I understand, that $10,000 grant kind of allows them to apply for other grants, so it might impact their ability to show that, they have the support of the township. That's how I always understood it when they asked for the grant. So, like for me, I think I'm going to have to not support that, although, I want to support Dry Grad, but I do want to support the Fort Langley Jazz Festival. So.
Yeah, so my understanding too, I had a question that I had a different rationale potentially. I was there the last couple of years, and it's my opinion that they're far below the required attendance. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And it was a similar question, I guess, through yourself to staff. Does that organization require a grant from the township in order to apply for other grants from other levels of government?
Mr. Bracken, do we know the answer to that?
We'd have to go away and look into that, Your Worship, sorry.
Okay, so maybe that, if that's the case, this could be revisited.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, I would love to support Dry Grad as much as possible, and if we can up that figure, absolutely, let's do it. But I think that before I could be comfortable voting on this reallocation, I'd want to know whether or not they needed at least some money from the township in order to actually go and get the grants that
So-
make them so well-resourced.
Yeah, and I agree, and there'd be no harm in them raising that after the fact. I think that, again, I raised the fact that staff are in a difficult position to be counting people, and I recognize they are going to have the position to support these events, especially when they've been approved in the past. But I have been to the last 2, and I can confirm that, in my opinion, they're far below the metric of thousands of people. So be my position that there's other considerations or criteria to consider this motion. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, mine's more of a kind of a housekeeping matter. Is that, if I may, through the chair to staff, I'm a big supporter of Dry Grads. If a particular school have done other things like raise money and they don't need all of it or just a portion of it, would they submit the financial statement or the requirement, or would it just be given automatically, if I may, through a chair?
Mr. Bagan, do you?
Generally,
dispersed,
it's a top-up with the disbursement, so we don't normally inquire what fundraising they've done. I presume if there was to be too many funds, they'd simply roll it over to the next grad year.
I guess supplemental, would they apply for it if they didn't need it?
The history of this goes way back, so I'm not sure that the origins or their applications. I think it was council recognizing the importance of dry grad, so they do supply material now, but I'd be cautious in characterizing that there was an application in its first instance.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Popte?
Through your worship to staff. I noticed that the Fort Langley Lions for the May Day Parade is only granted $5,000. Is that because they only requested $5,000?
So I'm going to come
Oh,
back
sorry.
to you. We're still dealing with the amendment request.
Okay, because it
around-
kind of ties in just in terms of volumes of people, but I can.
Because I think we're going to be addressing that one as well based on the submission from the Fort Langley Lions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So go back to you for a second time. Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, I think, back to the Jazz Festival, they went through COVID, and I know that was a real hit. So I think numbers would probably, increase if we can still support them. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that maybe those numbers, they're still making a comeback.
I'll call the question on the amendment. And that carries with Councillors Kunst, Councillor Richter opposed. So now back to the main motion. Councillor Mark, do you have a third one? Is that correct? Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, we're getting through this list quickly. With regards to Section F, banner grants.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm happy with recommending approving for this year, but I note that this isn't actually in our policy. It's by council resolution from 2021, and I'm wondering if perhaps I'll make a motion here to ask staff to amend policy to include this category of grants, providing what the criteria are and perhaps the maximum allowable grants.
Okay, so before we take that, so that might be coming after we dispose of the main motion as amended. You could add a subsequent motion to add it to the policy in future years. Is that something that would work? Okay, so I'll make a note of that. I'll come back to you for a separate distinct motion at the end of the main motion as amended. You had a third one?
I do, and this might be something you want to wait till the end as well, with regards to the Gateway of Hope. Councillor
Yeah,
Hopke
okay,
had
so
read-
let's deal with that as a separate motion as
okay.
well. Okay, thank you.
Then I'm good.
Okay, good?
Thank you.
Councillor Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to have a look at C29, South Fraser Community Rail Society, and make sure, move that request be honored.
That be funded? Okay, is there a seconder to that? Yes. Seconded by Councillor Martins. Is there any discussion on adding C29 to funded? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that. Oh, so hold on, so somebody did decide. Councillor Pratt, do you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm just curious. The rationale, I missed this one in the package, why it wasn't included originally through yourself.
It's item number 3 on page 10, a regional initiative with no other declared funding sources.
Okay.
In addition, the majority of the individuals served by the project will not be townships. So there was a note in the staff report. It was a footnote. It's easy to miss it. Easy to miss it. Yeah. So I had a similar concern and came to the conclusion that they are advocating for potentially significant capital investment would occur within the township, and saw that that is an exception that should potentially be considered. So appreciate you raising that. Seeing no other discussion on C29, I'll call the question on that amendment. That carries unanimously. Councillor Bailey, back to you. Do you have another
Yeah,
one?
I also see E4, the Royal Canadian Legion, $5,000 for Remembrance Day. I was brought up that this is the most important day in the year, so I'd like to make sure that they get funded at $5,000.
Mr. Backin, I don't know if when staff want to respond to this. It says here applicants have not provided an event plan. So the application was deemed incomplete. Is this something that we could potentially revisit again as a separate motion to have this brought back separately? Are they looking for help to create this event plan, or any thoughts on a potential process?
In past, quite often, it's just the capacity of the volunteers, so it would be appropriate to simply say that they be provided with the funding on the condition they provide us with an event plan, or work with staff to provide an event plan.
Flipping through the report here, do we know if we're supporting the Fort Langley event or other events in a similar fashion? Would they have something to maybe consider all Remembrance Day events in aggregate?
No, that's correct. I think we're trying to support all events equally, so.
So maybe, Councillor Bailey, we could look at that as a subsequent motion to look at supporting all Remembrance Day events equally, and then maybe clean that up for next year if that works for you. So I'll make a note of that as a separate motion. Do you have anything else, Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, I had a request that the Coghlan Hall had not been covered, and because the person that was putting in the application was sick, and they have subsequently put in the request, and I'd like that to be considered for
Do you
funding,
have the
please.
page for that for me?
Yeah, page 7.
Page 7. So that was moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Martins. Just curious if there's, Councillor Bailey, do you have anything more you'd like to add to that?
I understand that they've been a long-standing member of the community, and it was only because the person that was going to put in the application was ill, and I don't think someone should be cut off, especially when they've been serving the community for a long time.
Do you wish to speak to that as well, Councillor Martins? Are you good? No. All right. Thanks, great, Councillor Bailey. So, Councillor Ferguson on the Coghlan Hall amendment.
I'm still, okay, just made a point of, I'm just, since I'm speaking, I don't need a point. I wanted to know what happened to the Legion. That's going to come back as
We're going to
a
do it as a separate
separate
motion.
motion.
Separate
And
motion,
this
yeah.
one is going to be.
An amendment to
There's
fund
a
it.
special, special, there's an amendment on the table for this, for the $5,000, if I may.
Yeah, and I view this a little slightly suggesting that this one being in a capital category could be
Okay.
added separately from
I just want to clarify
from an
that.
event item.
I don't have any objection to it. I just want to clarify.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, so I'll call the question on that amendment for Coghlan Hall. And that carries unanimously. So back to the main motion as amended. Councillor Bailey, do you have anything else?
No, that's it.
Great.
Thank you.
Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Thank you, and through yourself to staff, just a question in regards to Section F with the banner grants. If there was an organization that over the course of the next fiscal year wanted to potentially participate outside of these three, is there an opportunity for them to, come delegate to council, ask for something like that, and would there be the ability on our end to do so?
Mr. Backen, process on these?
If that's correct. In fact, they could actually simplify the process by making just an application, then it would be part of the process going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
No, I'm off.
You're off. Good. Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to move division. I'd like to separate the last paragraph off from the main motion.
The council endorsed the revised capital improvement grant program?
Policies, yeah.
Further revise the criteria. All right, so I'll move to, is there a seconder to division? Seeing no seconder, Councillor Richter? Anything else, Councillor Richter?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. So seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question on E1 as amended. That carries unanimously, so go back to Councillor Martins. Go ahead. You had a motion on banners you'd like to
Yes,
deal with.
thank you. I'd like to make a motion to direct staff to amend policy 066022 to include banner grants in the policy, including criteria and maximum allowable grants.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Any speakers on that one? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that. That carries unanimously. Councillor Martins, you had a second one, I believe. Gateway of Hope.
Yes, thank you. With regard to the Gateway of Hope, back at February 27th meeting, the Gateway of Hope came and did a delegation to council, and there was a motion made at that time to refer the request for funding to the grant process. Staff has since advised that it's not a suitable request within the way the grant program currently is. So I would like to make a motion that we continue as we have in good faith with funding the Gateway of Hope this year for $100,000 as we have in the last 5, and that this be revisited again on an annual basis. I guess funded from, would it be council contingency or?
I believe to discuss this, Mr. Backen, the surplus or contingency, either one, you'll find.
Actually, Your Worship, we were able to actually look at the records, and technically the funds has not been removed from the budget.
Yeah, that's what I thought as
it's
well. So I
contained.
was correct on that. So it is actually still in the budget. It just requires council approval. So if you wish to fund what's already funded, make it
Yes,
official.
please.
Okay, is there a seconder to that?
Yeah, me.
Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Ms. Bauer, can you clarify the motion as you have it, just to make sure that Councillor Martins' intent is captured?
The intent is to fund the Gateway of Hope with $100,000 for this year and then revisit it in future.
Yeah,
Understood.
on an annual
Did you
basis.
tweak that? Okay,
Yeah,
so
thank
that
you.
was seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Van
Yeah,
Popta?
I
Yep,
speak to
go
it.
ahead. Yep, go ahead, Councillor Martins.
Yeah, no, I just want to, with regards to this, I think it's really important that we continue this funding. As the Gateway of Hope is the only organization operating in either of the Langleys that provides shelter 12 months of the year to our homeless population, and I think it is a vital resource, particularly in this day and age. So that is the reason for my request, and that's what's important to me, looking after our people.
Right. Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, I echo that statement. It's very important that we keep this organization going. Their support services outside of even just their shelter is absolutely amazing. I do have a bit of a comment or question in terms of process. So it was identified after the February meeting that this was to go to the grant program. And then when we get this, there was no indication that it didn't actually qualify. And so I think we were caught a bit off guard that it wasn't included in here, and it just kind of felt like it maybe fell between the cracks. Is there a way that we can tighten, or what what can we do to ensure that if we've made a request at council that this doesn't happen?
Yeah, so maybe I can just, Mr. Bracken, I think the goal with the previous council direction was to see these kinds of annual allocations flow through a modified and expanded grant program. And I think staff are obviously still working on capturing all of these requests and consolidating them. Would that be fair?
That's correct, Your Worship. It's a consolidation. When it was first, directed, it was going to be an independent report. However, the referral motion was quite clear. It go to the grant process, so it should have been dealt with at this time. When we picked up on it, we then circulated the memo that I think is in your package or either today or before.
Today,
So,
yeah. So it's definitely been captured by staff that going forward, the direction is to put this into the grant program and not necessarily even create a category for it, but at least report back annually that this money is going out for this purpose to this organization, as opposed to what's happened in the past, of course, which we've all talked about, that it can be allocated for a 5-year period, and then it's sort of quote unquote forgotten about for that 5-year period. I think it'd be good for us to see that on an annual basis.
Yes.
So we agree. Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, I think this is important to support this because the Gateway of Hope is actually the only extreme weather response shelter that we had listed. We had St. Andrew's Church come on later, but the ability to be able to know that you're going to have some beds and that responding to the need at the extreme weather, both hot and cold, is really important. And this is the only one currently that we have in the area that can deal with EWR. Thanks.
Thank you. So with that, I'll call the question on that. That carries unanimously. And I'll move on. Councillor Bailey, Remembrance Day.
Yeah, I'd like to move that we support all the Remembrance Day ceremonies in the township equally to the tune of $5,000 each.
In a range of, maybe it can, and to bring that report to us by September, Mr. Bracken, would that be reasonable? And then we would look to indicate support for these events this year, Ms. Councillor Bailey. I believe that's your intent.
Yes. Okay to go ahead and speak to it?
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah,
Is there a seconder to that? I seem to get a seconder to that. Seconded by Councillor Martins. Go ahead.
As I've said before, I grew up on a street of vets, and it can't be overstated the importance of recognizing the veterans. And that's not just First and Second World War. I'm also talking, we just had the Remembrance Stone for the Kapyong, and that was 70 some odd years. And also the peacekeepers and all the other veterans that Canada should be so, got to censor myself here, so proud of. They have represented this country, kept us safe, and we've got to make sure that the vets know that we support all of them. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
Yeah, as a Legion member for a number of years, I'm a big supporter of this as well. And I know they do the best they can in submitting the actual appropriate paperage and application. The challenge now, I think, as the years go by, is that there's safety for closing roads and to hire the appropriate people. So that's why the cost keeps going up to block the road off and things like that. They do the very best they can with the volunteers they have, but I'm a big supporter of this and others over the years. And I know the township has been very, very supportive as well. So I have to compliment the staff as well that they've done their best part to help the Legion. So I think it's an important thing to continue on. And I believe, if I may, through the chair to staff, does the Legion look after all the sites? That's, of course, Aldergrove, Murrayville, and I'm thinking Fort Langley, if there might be another one. Well, we have Murrayville as well, 2 Murrayvilles, if I may, through the chair.
Your Worship, each Legion has their own event, and I guess depending upon their strength of volunteers and the resources they have, they do coordinate the events, and to the extent they can't put them on. But yes, there are third parties that sometimes assist, and I think that the direction is for us to assess that and come back with equanimity of funding and trying to make sure that those celebrations can continue.
Yeah, and I think they'd appreciate that support to sit down with the groups. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Bracken, just to add to that, I mean, it's possible that the Murrayville event doesn't require as much support or financing as, say, the one in Fort Langley with significant attendance now flowing into the road and things like that, and then the Aldergrove one again as well. More logistical challenges than others, and I think we would look for some equity of support based upon their needs. Councillor Van Popta, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, my comment is kind of on that same vein. Wondering if we should use verbiage that's saying up to $5,000, so some of the smaller events might not need the allocation.
It'll come back in September, and we can tweak the language then, and I think staff have the gist, right? Yeah, thanks. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly give a thanks to Councillor Bailey for catching this. Obviously, as a Legion member myself and former or soon-to-be former member of the forces, it's awesome that we're doing this in light of what happened today in Ukraine. I think it's definitely apt that we're remembering and going out of our way to do more for the people who are giving their all for us.
Great. Call the question on that, E1. That carries unanimously. So I've got one, Mr. Beck. I don't know if we can do it this way. I wanted to highlight for council's information, I left it outside of the main motion, but in regards to May Day, there was an email that came in from that organization in regards to some of the challenges they're having with sponsorship and again, keeping that event going. I'd like to satisfy that request for this year and award them an additional $5,000 from council contingency towards the May Day Parade. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, call the question on that. That carries unanimously. And then I had a second subsequent to that, Mr. Bracken. I think it's appropriate maybe to consider an additional category, and it's just that for staff to consider and creating an additional category for parade events, which are facing some significant increases in complexity. Is there a seconder to that? Yeah. Seconded by Councillor Martins. Is there any discussion on a potential category for parades? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that. That carries unanimously. Is there anything more on this year's grant program? Great. E2, capital budget transfer, bridge deck replacement. Get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Martins. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Go ahead, Councillor Van Popta.
Yeah, I just have a question through your worship to staff. Maybe more just a process question. Just wondering why we're doing a transfer after the work has been completed, and why those requests aren't made ahead of time.
Mr. Bracken, to you or Mr. Rowland? Mr. Swag, sorry. Mr. Swag.
Thank you, through your worship. The bridge deck was recently replaced through the pre-existing budget, but during the process we found some tie rods that required replacement as well. We received a quote from the contractor to do the work. We're now looking for budget approval to do the actual work. So the work has not been completed yet for what we're asking for today.
Okay, so this is like a change order kind of event. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Call the question. E2. That carries unanimously. E3, capital request for Willowbrook Connector 208th Street and 212 Connector transportation projects for funding of $810,000 for one portion of the Willowbrook Connector, beginning that work, and $500,000 in design to start the project for 208th Street from 68th Avenue to 76, and the 212 Connector between 208th and 77A. I will move that. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on this? Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if staff could give us a presentation on this, and also if there's going to be public consultation. I note on page 2 it says this is the first step, and I'm just wondering how many more steps there will be and what the total cost will be.
Mr. Bracken?
Thank you, through your worship. I'll try to answer the best I can here. We are currently advancing the phase 1, which is, we call it the Willowbrook Connector. These are some early works, which includes environmental offsetting, utility relocation, and some property agreements. In addition, we are looking to advance the detailed design for the next section, which will be from 68 to 72nd and beyond, which could be a phase 3. So as of this time, we are based on previous reports, we are contemplating the ultimate design along 208th Street that's been previously presented to council as part of I think, numerous reports we did on costs and land and construction. So at this time, this is just the first step in the process.
Councilor Richter, do you have any follow-ups?
Yeah, I'm still wondering if we could get a staff presentation on it, and I'm also wondering why there were no maps included in the report to council.
So do you wish to make a motion to refer this for a presentation? How would you like to address the presentation item?
I would like to get a staff presentation on it.
I believe that, Mr. Bracken, we would probably want a motion of council to put the time and effort into a presentation. Yeah.
But I'll make a motion that we ask staff to do a presentation on this.
Okay, so is it a referral motion, or would you like to do it as a subsequent motion after this one?
I don't think it needs to be a referral motion. I think we can do a subsequent.
Okay, so I'll come back to you. And then on the public input item, Mr. Bracken, do you want to try to answer that, or?
Certainly, Your Worship, as part of the process that once we've actually been able to better define the properties that are going to be impacted and affected, we can then actually publish the map, as that's still a bit of a work in progress. That would include 208 Street and the connector itself as it goes around. Some of the challenges and opportunities are it's actually the road widths and the impact of the greenways and other elements. As to then going to public consultation, usually we provide notification through such sources as the website and perhaps newspapers as we're going forward, because this isn't a project where there can be a lot of input as to the design. There certainly can be as to some of the amenities, but the actually basic design itself has to follow the basis of the highway and traffic bylaw and other elements. So we did anticipate some level of, I guess, public awareness, but not a open house or meeting.
All right, so I'll call the question on E3. I'll come back to Councilor Richter. That carries unanimously. So, Councilor Richter, do you wish to make that motion?
Yes, I'd still like to have a staff presentation on it.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councilor Kunst. Councilor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I guess my question would be, would that presentation hold up actually moving forward with any of the work that we just voted on?
Mr. Bracken?
Thank you, through your worship. Staff can certainly provide some design, some lane configurations for the different sections. Again, without having the design finalized.
So Your Worship,
preclude any of those.
So Your Worship, just to augment what Mr. Zwag is saying, the way this has been set up, we'd be proceeding with the actual funding for as laid out in the report itself. The actual presentation itself would therefore be independent and really form more of an update onto it. So it wouldn't impact the timing unless there's some derivative actions taken from the presentation that could impact the timing. But at this point, because we've actually allocated the funding, the first part would go and would stand alone from the presentation itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Van Popta?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we can maybe accomplish this in a different way, maybe via a report to council or a memo. I'm not sure if a presentation is necessarily warranted at this stage.
Yeah, I think I kind of can concur. I think potentially, rather than a formal presentation, it could come forward as a funding request with the information within that, and then maybe if there's a presentation required. I mean, I don't want to do a presentation for the sake of a presentation. Yeah. I think when this engineering work would result in an outcome which would be provided to council in a council meeting. I'm not sure if a presentation of a road design is really necessary. So I would tend to occur. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question on the request for a presentation. And that fails with Councillor Kunst, Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Martins, Councillor Van Popta, Councillor Pratt, and Councillor Ferguson opposed. F1, bylaws for first, second, and reading, official community plan amendment, rezoning application number 100242 on 72nd Avenue, bylaw number 5836, 5837. This is for 349 townhouse units on the Willoughby ALR boundary. Can I get a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Councillor Richter, go ahead.
I note in the report that there are 502 significant trees on this property. Only 20 will be retained, and there will be less replacement trees than the trees that are taken out. And I'm just very concerned about the drainage because this is essentially on the Willoughby slope. Where are the greenways and the wildlife corridors going to go? And what's going to happen with the drainage? So I'm opposed to this development. I don't think it's the right location for it, and I strongly object to the removal of 502 trees.
Mr. Richardson, can you potentially address those two items on drainage, wildlife, and tree preservation?
Thank you, Worship. Maybe with the benefit of the slides here, just give me a moment. So Your Worship is indicated on the slide here is an aerial photo. There's a conceptual drawing indicated here. Item 1 with respect to trees, the subdivision development servicing bylaw appendix has a per acre tree requirement. So that's why there's a differential in the existing trees versus the proposed trees. It's a 30 trees per acre replacement calculation. Secondly, with respect to drainage, subdivision development servicing bylaw outlines best management practices with respect to stormwater management. And you'll notice here on the right-hand part of the screen, or the easterly portion of the site, a stormwater management pond is proposed in conjunction with the development. Also of note are the green areas, especially here on the southern boundary. There is a greenway identified on the Northeast Gordon Estate Neighborhood Plan, which runs on the southerly boundary here, as well as an arbor ribbon trail that runs in this area here. An ALR interface to the north where the properties adjoin the ALR here, as well as here to the north where the township holds some lands here for a future park. Part of the I guess in terms of additional background, the site is zoned or designated residential and suburban residential in the Willoughby Plan, and special study area in the Northeast Gordon Estate Plan. The idea there being that consideration be made from the McGilvery House, which as part of this application is in the southwest corner of the site and accommodated there, and to be protected as a development prerequisite through the development as a development prerequisite as a heritage revitalization agreement. And also the subject application fulfills a number of the requirements of the special study area, being dealt with on a comprehensive basis, providing for an overall sort of road network and access point, and consideration of housing forms on the site. In this way, as noted, the buffers, greenways, stormwater management, and a ground-oriented housing form is what is presented here for council consideration or worship.
Great, thank you. Councilor Van Popta, go ahead.
Yeah, just 2 questions. Happy to see that the McGilvery House is being restored by the proponent. I just want to know who operates it or what happens to it after it's been restored.
Go ahead.
Through your worship to staff.
Go ahead.
Through your worship, the McGilvery House, as currently contemplated, will sit on its own fee simple lot. The legislative tool for the provincial government is a heritage revitalization agreement that will then act as a covenant in effect with respect to the eventual owner of that property and the house, ensuring its long-term retention and ensuring its long-term heritage preservation, your worship. Noted in the council report, there's also a requirement for that creation of that lot, as well as the required access easements through the subject townhouse site to the property to ensure that it remains in its ultimate location in perpetuity, your worship.
I had one other question or actually comment. Can you bring up the 3rd slide again where it shows the site plan? Thanks. On the right-hand side of the development, I see kind of 4 or 5 little pocket parks, if my blind eyes actually can read that. Is there a way that we can maybe consolidate them a little bit in the site plan to make them more usable space, bigger park spaces instead of small little tiny ones strewn throughout?
Mr. Richardson, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I kind of agreed with that when it was raised by Councilor Van Popta.
Thank you, through your worship, Councilor Van Popta. Concurrence from the staff level with respect to that item. The items that are conceptually shown on this plan are the zoning bylaw required age-friendly area requirements. So we would want to work with the proponent in terms of appropriate sizing and usefulness and functionality of those spaces.
So one thought I had maybe is that since the site is significantly sloped, which isn't really indicated here, if you were to concentrate the amenity in one spot, it may be challenging for some residents to get to it on a regular basis. Would that be one reason for this dispersion?
Through to your worship, yes, your worship, that's one consideration. So staff working with the proponent and their qualified professionals in-house and consultant landscape architects try to balance those items of availability of these open spaces to the majority of residents and the experiential nature of those spaces for folks of different age categories. So they may have different size requirements, and as you noted, the site may reveal or yield where they might more appropriately want to be, but certainly we can work with the proponent at the more detailed stage with those comments in hand.
That work?
Yep,
Yeah.
thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. I had one question and then an amendment. Mr. Richardson, if you could update me on the current status of the potential improvement to the intersection of Smith Crescent and Crush Crescent, and I apologize in advance if it's in the report, but I did not see it.
Thank you, Worship. I'll just note as item 2 is a development prerequisite, has all the subdivision development servicing bylaw required upgrades to that. Those upgrades are currently anticipated and contemplated to include a signalization at 72nd Avenue and Crush Crescent. So we'll be working with the proponent and their professional engineer with respect to that item.
Okay.
In advance of that, staff have already begun some initial design work on that, Your Worship.
I believe that was potentially impacting another application. Do we have some progress on resolution to that as well?
Your Worship, that's correct. Staff are actively working on a preliminary design with respect to that intersection and some potential for contributions to advance those works, Your Worship.
Yeah, that would allow the other application to proceed concurrently with this one potentially, or ahead of even potentially, right?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So thanks. I have an amendment. I'd like to draw council's attention to page 5, item 14, specifically in regards to the voluntary additional community amenity contribution. I'd like to make an amendment similar to one I've done and proposed previously when we see some of these extraordinary contributions, to move an amendment to item 14 to add at the end with 100% contributed and deposited into the community amenity contribution fund. So move. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Martins. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Seeing Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
There was a note in the report from the developer regarding the CHDs, if I may, through the chair.
Go ahead.
It's on page 15 of attachment G, F1, to Mr. Richardson and from the president regarding CHD policy. Is that what we were talking to about, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, it is. Just wanted to, from the beginning, when these ones are extraordinary beyond the policy, given a unique circumstance, I think it's appropriate to give staff direction on where to put it.
So can Mr. Richardson answer my question?
Of course he can, yeah.
Or you already answered it?
No, he can. Go ahead.
If I
Mr.
may, through the
Richardson?
chair to Mr. Richardson?
Through your worship to Councillor Ferguson, as Mayor Woodward outlined, item 14 of the development prerequisites has the requirement for the CSE contribution that is outlined by the proponent on council's package attachment G, F1, page 15. Staff understand Mayor Woodward's amendment there provides that clarification to staff as to its allocation.
Okay, well, that's just clarified for me. Thank you. I'm just asking the same question twice. Thank you.
Yep, great. Thank you. Calling the question on that amendment. That carries unanimously. Back to the main motion as amended. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. That carries with Councillor Richter opposed. G1, bylaws for first, second, and third reading. G1, rezoning application number 100702, bylaw number 5822. This is for a 1 acre site for 6 family lots. Get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Van Popta. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on G1? Seeing none, Call the question. That carries with Councillor Richter and Councillor Pratt opposed. G2, rezoning application number 100697, bylaw number 5863. This is for a residential building in the Carvorth area at 870-196A Street, one of the first buildings in that area. Let's get a mover. It's industrial. Moving on to G2, right? Yeah, so did I say residential?
Yeah.
I meant industrial only. Sorry about that for the confusion. It is for an industrial building, the first one in that area. Is there a mover to that? Moved by Councillor Bailey. Is there seconded by Councillor Van Popte? Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I note there are 154 significant trees on this property. 0 will be retained. There will only be 77 trees post-development. I assume there's going to be replacement trees. I was just wondering to staff where those replacement trees will go.
Mr. Richardson?
Through your worship, as Councillor Richter noted, and as mentioned previously, the subdivision development servicing bylaw replacement tree requirement is based on a per acre calculation. So the 77 post replacement trees will be noted on the site themselves, 68 of them, and then along with the 9 street trees, your worship.
Great, thank you.
So,
Sorry, I'll go back to you. Sorry.
replacement trees, so we're taking 154 trees out, and there'll only be 77 trees put back in.
Mr. Richardson?
Through your worship, Councillor Richter, that is the current requirement in the bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and through yourself to Mr. Richardson. I note in the site plan, it looks like there are a number of trees retained in the streamside protection and enhancement area. Are those included when we see the number of trees taken down versus retained? Or are those separate because they're in the protected area?
Through your worship, to Councillor Pratt, thank you for the question. Lots of times when staff receive that information, there may be because they're in a SPIA area, there may not be a specific tree count within that area, so we may not have the information to provide to council. And we do provide that information. I think there's another report on the agenda today that does actually provide that information, the amount of 20 when we do have that information. Outside of that, in the developed area, we do have more specific information why it's specifically noted. And as noted on the screen here, you can see the undeveloped area, the SPIA area, which will be protected by covenant as part of a development prerequisite, and the subject proposed site layout, your worship.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, I like this development because I like what it sets in regards to work life. You've got an awful lot of people living up in that area, and this would be a very nice place for if someone lives in that area. It'd be a wonderfully short commute, and also its access to Highway 1 there is again really good, and hopefully this will spur a little more industrial development in that immediate area, and have a nice pocket of short commutes for people that work in the area. I live in the area.
Great. Councillor Van Popte?
Yeah, I actually know this area quite well. That road, 196A, is actually currently a gravel road with a trucking company at the end of it. Who will be upgrading that road? Is it on the developer? And if so, is it going to be able to handle the truck and transfer traffic at the end?
Yes, staff, go ahead. Mr. Richardson?
Through your worship, to Van Pop, the answer to both those is yes.
Yes, that we are maintaining it, or yes, that the developer will be putting in that road?
Through your worship, for clarity, the developer is responsible for those upgrades, and they will be designed to accommodate the industrial traffic, your worship.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question on G2. That carries with Councillor Richter opposed. Move on to G3, Fire Hall Loan Authorization Bylaw and Alternative Approval Process, bylaw number 5880. This is for a borrowing bylaw to replace Fire Hall number 5 in the Brookswood Fernridge area. You got a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Bailey. Seconded by Councillor Martin. Is there any discussion on G3? Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why we have to borrow for this.
Mr. Bagan, do you have any comments on that?
Thank you, Your Worship. As we try to allocate the uses of our reserves and some of the projects we have coming up, we think this is probably one that's nice and compact and therefore is worthy of a borrowing. We anticipate further use of our reserves and other projects and further borrowings as we come forward, but we're trying to do them by linking them to specific projects, and this was a fairly easy one to do.
Mr. Bagan, is it a requirement from MFA or provincial government to link them to specific projects, or strongly advised?
I would say strongly advised to the extent that we have to be able to describe the nature and character of what we're doing, but not necessarily the very specifics, the final drawing, so to speak.
Right. Any follow-ups, Councillor Richter? No. I have one amendment. I'm going to propose, maybe just easier to get that disposed of now. Bring Council's attention to the first paragraph. The Council approved the construction of a fire hall in Brookswood to replace fire hall number 5, as outlined in the report to Council on February 27th, 2023. Now that had some very specific direction. So I'd like to move an amendment to delete the words "as outlined in the report to Council on February 27, 2023, which prescribed a very specific replacement location, which may or may not be the one ultimately chosen in consultation with Council, management, and the new fire chief. So is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
Okay, I had requests to speak before you made your amendment.
We'll come back to you, Councillor Ferguson.
Well, come back to me. Can I ask it anyway? It's just a housekeeping
Is
question.
it related to the amendment, Councillor Ferguson?
No.
Okay, so great. So we'll finish the amendment and then we'll come straight back to you, okay? So this is on the question, I think just to clarify that they don't want to tie it to that report. So I'll call the question on that amendment. That carries with Councillor Richter opposed. And go back to the main motion. Councillor Bailey, go ahead. As amended now.
As you can imagine, I am really glad to see this going ahead. It's about time to get moving ahead. We haven't built a firehouse since 2006. And even that one was cheaped out on and not built for the future. So by going after this amount of money for the hall, we can not only build up to service the people right now, but also build to the future as we haven't done in the past, obviously. So yeah, I'm really glad to see this moving ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Thank you. Mine is more of a housekeeping question. Okay, the item is 25 million, as in paragraph 1, item 3. And as we go to the explanation, it says 25.25 million, if I may through the chair, whether there's a change or there's a reason for the extra 0.25 million, if I may through the chair?
Mr. Bracken, I believe that that's outlined in the last paragraph there. It does say a different amount. Do we need an amendment for that?
So, through your worship.
Yeah, go ahead.
The MFA retains a percentage, the 1%, so we up our request to include that, so we net the 25 million.
So would that
Question,
mean,
Councillor Ferguson, yeah.
if I may through
That's
the,
good, yeah.
would that mean that the clerk during the minutes would add that memo? I don't know. I don't want to make an amendment with the clerk.
I don't think it's required. I think it's been clarified, Councillor Ferguson.
Okay, well, it'll be clarified in the minutes
Want
as
to
well.
clarify it again? Is that what's...
Yes, in the minutes. I just wanted to see, because it wasn't a part of the explanation. That's it, and as much as the council of the day, I try not to be critical of my colleagues, did their best some 14 years ago, I don't think they were thinking they were cheaping out. But a correction to my colleague, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I echo some of the comments. I'm excited to finally have a new fire hall down in Brookswood. I think it's a long time coming. I do remember a past conversation at a previous council meeting where going into debt would be the last resort when it comes time to paying for our capital program. And so just to kind of get some more clarification through yourself to staff on what about this project it suits going into debt versus trying to use it from one of the other envelopes that we created at the start of this budget process.
Mr. Bracken?
So, Your Worship, with some qualifications, most of our reserves are tending to be allocated for specific purposes. What we tend to do is borrow internally for those unless there's a fund designated, such as a fire replacement fund. What that means is then we try to utilize the funds that we have on hand, but quite often that's through internal borrowing. As we look at the longer range then, and we see there may be other projects that are going to be coming forth, such as recreation centers or additional fire halls or additional, recreational amenities, we try to look at those at the same vein, which means that we try to estimate there which is going to be the ones that are fundable and which ones are the ones that are going to need, the external resources. When we allocate those or we look at those, we also look at them with the eye of trying to determine which ones will be easier to actually, link or understand. And this was a nice, neat package to do at this point because it's fairly understandable and fairly linkable in terms of what the objective will be, whereas some of the other ones will be a bit more complex in terms of both funding sources from internal reserves and as well from external sources such as grant funding or borrowing.
Okay, thank you. So this doesn't imply that we've already allocated enough of the other envelopes that we now are forced to go into borrowing to pay for the rest?
Not yet. We still have significant reserves, but they all have purposes.
Correct. Okay, thank you very much. And so I guess another just question, because I'm new to this, and so haven't been familiar with the alternative approval process just yet. And so with this process, when the results come in end of August, what happens then?
Once we receive the results, I will go through them and certify them as correct and do basically a certificate saying the results are final. And then the bylaw will come forward for final reading.
Okay, thank you.
I believe, Mr. Bracken, during that time, the borrowing bylaw is approved by the province. Is that correct?
The borrowing bylaw actually gets approved by the province prior to us going to the alternative approve process. Right. That's kind of the first step, which is why the final date is not till the end of August. We have to wait for the province to approve first.
So go ahead, Councillor Pratt. Yeah.
And if for any reason the approval process came back in the negative, what then?
We would have to actually do a referendum on it in order to go forward with it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, thank you. As a resident of Brookswood, I'm happy to support this. I'm excited to have a new fire hall in Brookswood. I've lived there my whole life, and I know that the residents will appreciate it. I do have a question about the 4.38%. The rate, that's MFA. So can we renegotiate that if that comes down? It just seems high.
It's a good question. Ms. Ruff, can you highlight that that's a projection, and then you determine the rate when you pull the bylaws? Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the current rate that they have posted, but when we pull the borrowing, then it will be at the current market rate.
So, Ms. Ruff, maybe just again, I think it's good to clarify the process. I've only seen it once, I think, last term. Ms. Ruff, can you clarify again, because I had some similar questions. So the bylaw becomes approved by council, MFA puts it into their borrowing cycle with other municipalities, and then you have the option to draw the funds at any point for 5 years based upon the need and potentially the rate. So we could have the bylaw there, approved, ready to go, and you use the funds as you need, and if council determines it wants to use the funding from this source, it doesn't have to use the fund. It's just prepared and ready to go.
That's correct.
So I think, Councillor Kuntz, the idea there is that even if we have a borrowing bylaw established, approved by the province, goes through the counter-petition process and approved by MFA, we have a 5-year window in which we can access the funds. They don't have to be drawn down from debt. It's just there. And the process is so long, I believe it's very prudent financial management to put it in place.
And one last question. When would we start building, and when do we anticipate this fire hall becoming a reality?
Mr. Bagan,
shovels in the ground kind
I think the hiring of the new fire chief will start that process now. Is that correct?
That's correct. And some conceptual, designs have been prepared. So we are getting close to advancing towards actual construction drawings, but it'll take us still a bit of time. Likely, it's about a 24-month, perhaps a bit longer project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to compliment all those involved, both this council and past, and also all those on our council that have been working pretty hard with not just fire but police and making Langley, I would think, working towards one of the safest communities in the region, and I think that's important to note. And this particular hall has been on the books for discussion of construction for quite a while. So I think it's a positive step. I hope we can build it for that amount, and I think that if we do everything right, we'll be prudent with our dollars and make things go accordingly. But I want to compliment all those of all staff, all councils in the past, and looking forward to it progressing accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, I just want to highlight as well in regards to Councillor Pratt's question. Currently, this community amenity contribution policy contemplates fire halls being paid for through the CAC program policy, and the fund for that currently has about $16 million in it. So it's not sufficiently to the point where a fire hall could be built with cash from the identified source for building this asset. And so you faced with the question of, do you wait until the money's there and then the cost goes up, we need the fire hall today. When we're anticipating that CAC program, through decisions made by this council, is going to be generating significant amounts of additional revenue in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So while we wait for those revenues to come in through development, it's prudent to get on with preparing for that growth and investing for the future, and investing in improving the safety of Brookswood and Fernridge residents. We constantly, I think, see these complaints of getting ahead of development, keeping up with our growth, and this is exactly what this is doing. This is investing for the future, knowing that the revenue will come later on through development to either pay off that debt early or contribute some amount from that fund to this project, and using some portion of this bylaw or all of it, depending on future decision making. So I view this as very prudent financial management, making a lot of sense, and investing for the future, which was a big theme last year. So this is an easy one for me. I appreciate all the work staff have done to prepare for this and bring this forward for council's consideration, and look forward to really improving the safety for people that live in Fernridge and Brookswood today and in the future. So with that, I'll call the question on G3. That carries with Councillor Richter opposed. Let's move on to bylaws for final adoption, I1. I'll just call the question. Is there a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Van Popte. Is there any discussion? Call the question on I1. That carries unanimously. I2, pre-authorized debit for property taxes bylaw amendment, bylaw number 5875. Get a motion? Moved by Councillor Martins, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on I2? Seeing none. Call the question on I2. That carries unanimously. I3, 2023 Langley Annual Rates Tax Collection Bylaw, bylaw number 5872. Get a motion? Someone's got to move this stuff. Councillor Martins, moved by Councillor Martins, seconded by Councillor Van Popte. Any discussion on I3? Seeing none. Call the question on I3. That carries with Councillor Richter opposed. I4, Sanitary Development Works Agreement Bylaw, Centerra Developments Bylaw number 5821. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Is there any discussion on I4? Seeing none. Call the question on I4. Councillor Bailey, you need to vote. There we go. That carries unanimously. Correspondence, move over to J1 to receive the correspondence from Patricia Wilson. Moved by Councillor Martins, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. I'll call the question on receipt, and then I'll come back. J1. That carries unanimously. Councillor Bailey, I believe you requested to speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really pleased this goes ahead. This is the first day of the month that recognizes MS, and one of the reasons this is so important is because MS, unfortunately, Canada is the leader in the world for MS, and has personally affected my family and many people I know. And one of the things that occurs to show the importance of this is if you look at the city of Vancouver, on May the 30th, what they actually do is they light up BC Place Stadium, they light up City Hall, they light up the sails, all in red, because MS is such a such an important factor in the Canadian society, and I think in doing something like this to recognize this incredibly disabling disease, I think we should be doing everything we can to draw attention and awareness to MS.
So you understand this is just a receipt that the clerk's note there. Did you wish to make some adjustments to the clerk's note, or?
Well, I'd love to see us light up the overpass that goes across 200th Street there for the day of May the 30th.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Martins. Is there any discussion on that? Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's called the Cole Harmony Bridge, if I may, through this. Is that correct to staff?
You know the name of that bridge, Mr. Bracken?
Technically, it was with a lengthy history, Your Worship.
I really appreciate you reminding us all of that history, Councillor Ferguson. Yeah. Is there? So I just want to confirm, Ms. Bauer, that you have that motion. You're good to go. Okay. Is there any for discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that. That carries unanimously. K1, minutes of committees, Heritage Advisory Committee, Standing Committee on Police Priorities and Initiatives, Recreation, Culture and Parks Advisory Committee, Council Process Committee, and Seniors Advisory Committee to adopt those minutes. Get a motion. Moved by Councillor Martins, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yes, I have several questions about these minutes, and I'd like to go through them before I vote on approval.
Go ahead.
Okay. The first set of minutes, the Heritage Advisory Committee, item number 6 on page 2 references the dismantling of the old general store and Michaud house. I'm just wondering what exactly that means. The old general store, I believe, is a display in the existing museum. Is it going to be relocated to the new museum?
At this point, given the timeline for construction, I think what they're referencing is it's going to be, relocated and preserved. I'd be this way I put it. Until we can actually conclude the layout of the new museum, I really couldn't commit to it being placed there. I suspect it would probably have elements of it, but I don't know if the entire, display would.
Okay, and dismantling the Michaud house, what's there to dismantle?
That we'd have to go back, unless any of the representatives from council were at that meeting that could explain, but the staff person's not here.
Go ahead, Councillor Kunst.
Both Councillor Martins and I were both there. I don't recall what dismantling the Michaud house and the general store in the old museum. I know we talked about the general store on 232 and Fraser Highway, but so we were there, but I don't recall.
Councillor Richter, you have another question?
Oh, I have many more, thank you. Page 5, which is the Standing Committee on Police Priorities and Initiatives. I'm just wondering, isn't there a requirement that there be members of the public in equal number to members of the council that are on standing committees? Am I incorrect in that?
Mr. Bracken, maybe you could, or Ms. Bauer, refresh that this is not a... Anyway, Ms. Bauer, I'll let you answer the question. Go ahead.
It actually doesn't specify members of the public versus selected members. It just has to have half the members being council members. So in this case, half the members are 3. The other 2 members of the committee are Mr. Backen and Superintendent Marston.
Okay, but Mr. Backen and Superintendent Marston, they're employees. They're not members of the public.
It doesn't specify members of the public, though. It just says members.
Okay, so this is a deviation from past practice, because in the past, whenever the mayors created a standing committee, it's had representatives of the public on it.
I believe in those cases, the mayors at that time have selected members of industry or members that had particular background.
Yeah.
In this case, the mayor has selected those he believes had the appropriate background.
Okay, well, as this is police priorities and initiatives, I really think there should be public people on this committee. And I just wanted to make that observation. The second thing is on page 6. The amended terms of reference for the Standing Committee on Police and Priorities were adopted. Doesn't council approve that? Then it's not on our agenda to adopt the terms of reference, nor is there a motion here on the agenda that we approve the amended terms of reference. I'm just wondering why.
Ms. Bauer?
For standing committees created by the mayor, it is not a requirement that the terms of reference are adopted by council. Our practice is for council committees, as they are council boards, those would be adopted by council. So in this case, the committee has the ability to adopt their own.
Okay. And the Colossus Theater parking lot issues on page 7, why has council never been informed of this? Why did this go to the committee and not come to council?
Mr. Bracken?
I think it was only temporal in that the issue arose, I think, in the interval between meetings, and at this point, the matter was actually the action of a complaint that was raised from the public about what was taking place, and I think the first forum that could be discussed at was at the standing committee. I think there's also further work being done on that complaint that's involving both municipal staff and RCMP staff, and as generally is the case, once we have a better handle on it, we'd be reporting back, in this case, to the committee and likely flowing back through to council at that point.
I was just sort of echo that. So the fact that Councilor Richter's discussing it on the council agenda would indicate that it has come to council?
Knowledge is certainly with some council
I
members.
mean,
Yes,
it's
Your
in the
Worship.
council agenda, so it's flowing through the committee process. So it is on the agenda. It has been brought to council. Councilor Richter?
Yeah, but I'm actually surprised at the mechanism that's being used to bring it to council's attention. That's the point I'm wanting to make here. I think council, all of council, should have a say on policing matters, not just
Mr. Bracken,
standing.
do all members of council have a say on policing matters?
That's correct, Your Worship. It has to be, whatever action the committee may take or recommend has to come back for council for endorsement, so.
Which is item K2 on today's agenda, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, and I noticed that this committee resolved into closed. Do the closed meetings come to council? Closed minutes come to council as well?
They are in the closed agenda package.
Okay, thank you. On page 13, going into the Recreation, Culture, and Parks Advisory Committee, reference to a firefighters versus RCMP water battle. And I'm just wondering why such a battle is necessary. And I mean, they work cooperatively together. Why are they being pitched against each other here?
Just to, as the rep, Councilor Bailey, do you wish to address that?
You bet I do.
Okay.
Yeah, this was part of a fundraising and a public awareness thing. It was called Pull or Plunge. And, well, in other aspects, firefighters and police typically have a lot of fun since they have to work under such stressing situations so often. So whenever we have an opportunity to raise awareness and support, in this instance, it was for Special Olympics. We still don't mind using the word battle when it comes to a water fight.
Councilor Impop, did you wish to add to that?
Yeah,
Councilor?
just this is actually an initiative from the youth representative on the Parks and Rec Committee, and he's done a lot of work. And it's a great. It's going to be a great community event to have some fun, and I look forward to hopefully kind of seeing it come to fruition.
Great.
Okay, and on page 19, which is the Seniors Advisory Committee meetings, I note that a councillor reported the new fire chief will be hired soon, and that work is being done with regards to public safety. These minutes are from April 19th. The announcement of the fire chief was formally made on April 26th, but council was not informed before the announcement. I'm wondering why.
Mr. Bracken,
Why would a committee of council and not council be informed?
Mr. Bracken, I believe there was a press release issued by the Township of Langley, is that correct?
On April 26th.
I think there was some further issue, I'm not sure it was a press release, but there were some communications indicating that the process was continuing, at least to as far as some inquiries are being made by third parties, and that it was then announced that I think within a matter of days that the hiring would be official. I think at that point the decision had been made, but that we were waiting for the response of the chief to actually accept. I think that was the cause for the delay.
Okay, but why would one member of council know this and not the other members of council? Was this person on the search committee?
Not sure who the person was that was making the commentary. It could have been from the search committee, or it could have been from some of the third-party inquiries that were being answered at the time that the results were imminent. There was some concern, I think, in terms of how long the matter was taking, and there was some processes that had to be completed before the actual contract could be executed.
Okay, and were there members of council on the search committee?
There were there were some members of council that were making themselves available to advise in terms of what was taking place, but the actual final interviews are conducted as has been done in the past by myself and the mayor. So we proceeded down that path and made the best selection we thought we could.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
I believe it was just process, but the process, people in the process are doing a lot of things. I wanted to comment on the firefighters and police battle. I have a suggestion that the mayor should be the referee and stand appropriate between the two parties. Thank you.
I'll take that under consideration, Councillor Ferguson. On the question of adopting the minutes of CPC and receiving the minutes of council advisory committees, I'll call the question on K1. That carries unanimously. K2, this is a recommended motion. Get a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Martins. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Is there anybody who wishes to speak to this? Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, it says here that the security infrastructure and fitness facility does not meet current industry best practices and standards. I'm just wondering, according to what or who?
Mr. Bracken?
Thank you, Your Worship. In this case, I believe the superintendent had cause to liaise with some of the folks in E Division that were able to actually lay out some of the current standards. And it became apparent that, number one, the facility was undersized in terms of fitness, and number two, that the technology was also somewhat dated and was probably due for some enhancement. Both of those matters have been the subject of previous discussions of various councils in terms of upgrades and whatnot, but it's only this year that they were able to rise to the top through the committee's recommendation and look at being imminently funded.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pratt?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just looking at Section 4, somebody who grew up in Murrayville, I spent many, many hours at Murrayville Park there, and I'm just curious what portions of the park are defined as the activity park. Is it the whole thing? And obviously, I'm assuming that when it comes time to make a decision on any reconfiguration, there'll be public engagement, since it is a park similar to what we had at the Aldergrove Skate Park.
So I'll address the latter. There was lots of discussion about this. Mr. Bracken, I'll refer to you here in a second, but I want to point out for council that the word potential probably couldn't be used more than it is there. It appears twice. So I believe that this is very early stages, and I'm certainly committed, and I believe the majority of council would be to making no changes to a public park without extensive public consultation based on what happened at Old Yale last term. Mr. Bracken, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, perhaps with some context. There's four components to the facility adjacent to the RCMP building, being a sport box, a volleyball, sand volleyball, being a tennis court, a basketball court, and then a bit of a water facility. The challenge the RCMP are facing right now is that there is insufficient secured parking in the vicinity. So the question that's being discussed is, well, can some or all of those parts that are being underutilized be discontinued or relocated? And the second part is, well, if they can be relocated, what are the options? And I use the sport box as an example. As part of staff's, I guess, understanding of the process, they're looking for other locations that might be suitable. So there's much work to be done before we can develop a concept that can actually then, as you referenced, go back before the council and then go before the public in terms of what the options actually are. The goal is simply to provide a secure and meeting safety standards for RCMP parking, but as well to make sure that the recreational, I guess, components are addressed through both the public process and relocation to the greatest extent possible.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Bracken, I'd like to maybe add a bit to that. So when you're adding members to the the rate that we have the last 5 years, and then going forward, planning into the future, we have significant fleet storage requirements that have to be addressed in a very constrained facility for that level of need. Would that be fair to add that something's got to be done there to address where we're going to put these vehicles?
That's correct, Your Worship, and even more so to the extent of the members and the staff that are working there. We're actually at capacity and utilizing part of the Blair parking lot, the WC Blair Recreation Facility parking lot, but we can't fence that one off, for example, and put a fence right in the middle of the parking lot. So we have to look at some creative solutions to move things around to make sure that they are at least sensible and meet the growing needs of the detachment, both by members and civilians.
And this potentially could provide an opportunity for the council to consider some significant improvements and upgrades to that outdoor amenity area in conjunction with recent development. I believe one of the skateboard park is quite close to those townhouses, and potentially other improvements combining with the WC Blair exterior upgrades. There might be a chance for council to make some significant improvements to the play area and the outdoor amenities in conjunction with a reconfiguration. Would that be fair?
Yes, it would.
Yes, it would. So, Councillor Pratt, I concur that there's some work to be done here for sure. Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I note that the motion suggests that there are 3 priority areas, the first one being improved fitness facility above the southwest wing of the RCMP detachment. I just wanted to ask Mr. Backen, do the RCMP members not have access to the Blair recreation facilities, like right across the street from them?
Mr. Backen, go ahead.
They do, and to some regards, we can actually extend the hours to assist in their usage. The challenge, though, is we can't extend the hours completely, and as well, there's the issue of security matters in terms of a utilization of the space by members themselves. They want to make sure they're in a secure space where there's limited, I guess, impact with the public, because if there's any issues, of course, it's going to be a challenge, and we want to make sure that they're protected from that, and as well protected from the inability to use it during any of the perhaps off hours, because of course the facility is operating on a 24-hour basis. Blair we can make available for certainly a larger basis than it is for the public, but it wouldn't be a 24-hour basis.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on K2. That carries with Councillor Richter opposed. K3, recommended motion from the CPC. Can a motion, please? Somebody got to move that. Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Is there any discussion on K3? Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Just as a clarification, at the next meeting will be the final vote on actually adopting the changes.
Ms. Bauer, do you want to clarify that we would be bringing it forward for first, second, and third, and then bringing it back again, potentially, if that were successful for final? Do you want to review the CPC process?
Yes, that is correct. It actually has not had first, second, and third reading, so it will have to come forward for first, second, and third, and then the following meeting could come for final.
Right. Call the question on bringing this back. That carries unanimously. Moving on to Mayor and Council reports. Again, I'll defer mine a little bit more. Is there any other members of Council? We have a Metro Vancouver update. Councillor Martins, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to weigh in, and hopefully I don't forget anybody's names here. It's been a really busy last 2 weeks since the last council meeting. This seems to be the season of events. In the last 2 weeks, Councillor Bailey and I have attended the School District Foundation fundraiser for student mental health, the British Motoring Show in Fort Langley, and Councillor Bailey was a good sport in attending the Royal Party Tea in Fort Langley. We also, along with Councillor Pratt, went to the UDI luncheon and had a tour of the Township of Langley water facilities with staff. Councillor Bailey, Rent, and myself toured the Canadian Museum of Flight. Councillor Bailey, Rent, Mayor Woodward, and myself attended the Langley RCMP Awards ceremony. And Councillor Bailey, Rent, Pratt, and myself, and Councillor Ferguson went to the Chamber April General Meeting. It was on crime prevention and business with the Langley RCMP. And then the final one that I wanted to mention was Mayor Woodward and myself were out on Saturday, I guess that was, along with Councillor Pratt, participating in the cleaning up of Langley and picking up garbage. So I mentioned all that, and an upcoming event, there will be a dunk tank at the May Day celebrations, and the committee just wants me to put out there, Anyone interested in volunteering to be in the dunk tank, that's mayor, fellow councillors, RCMP, or fire, we would love to have you volunteer for the dunk tank to help raise funds.
I can think of a few firefighters I'd like to see in the dunk tank. I also would like to volunteer Councillor Ferguson as well for the dunk tank. We'll move on into our council reports. I don't see any. I've got a Metro Vancouver update. At the last main board, the Gloucester urban containment boundary expansion was unanimously approved by the board to proceed with local government engagement. And once that process is done, it'll come back for a final vote. But that was unanimous with no concerns. There's also 2 committee updates to make. Removing myself from the Housing Committee, and Councillor Martins has been appointed in my stead to that committee as a Metro Vancouver alternate. I've also removed myself from the Climate Action Committee, and Mr. Councillor Van Popta will be taking our spot there on that committee. I've been finding that the committee work is for the region is rewarding and interesting, but I need some more hours to focus on the township taxpayer, and I think it's great that you've taken those on, and I really appreciate it. Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
With myself, I think Councillor Bailey, Councillor Pratt, and Councillor Kuntz, we were at the Fort Langley Canoe Club, and we went down the river in a dragon boat, so that was a very good thing. They've got a great organization. I think there's 500 or so members or something with different organizations on the water. I remember when that was built a number of years ago. And hitting the news regarding Metro Vancouver, microfibers are still out there, and there was an announcement made on, I guess, Global, talking about microfibers and I guess the type of fabric we have, so you can buy all sorts of laundry bags to filter out the microfibers, because it's the main concern to save ourselves and save our oceans. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Kuntz, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to report that I spent 4 days in Victoria with the UBCM executive. It was Advocacy Week, so it was a really great week just to connect with different MLAs and ministers. We had 3 priorities. One was housing, community safety, and economic development, especially for the rural areas. So yeah, it was great to just meet with people from all around the province, and I got to promote a little bit of Langley myself, as well as others that were there to, give them some of the good Langley stuff. So anyway, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Martins. Go ahead, Councillor Martins.
Thank you. Just under the Metro category, I attended the Metro Parks Committee meeting, and they continue to work on their mandate of protecting green spaces and connecting with people. So there are good conversations around the table, and I missed out on the paddling opportunity to attend the Fraser Valley Regional Library board meeting. That's all.
Good. Okay, so just looking at the agenda here, we're probably going to be able to get through this relatively quickly, but I will call a quick break if people would like that. Otherwise, we can probably wrap this up here quickly. But is there anybody looking for a break? We can just wrap this up. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll come back here at 3:25. Okay, we'll get resume the meeting here. We'll get going with item N1, rezoning application number 100617, development variance permit application run concurrent 100165, bylaw number 5856. This is an item from a prior meeting. First, second, and third reading for 16 single-family lots. Get a motion, please, to move that. Moved by Councillor Van Popta. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Martins. Councillor Van Popta, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned before, when this got deferred to this meeting, just had some questions and concerns regarding the fact that this was within the 800 meter of the 200th Street corridor, and that there's some other parcels of land on that street that there's some townhouses, there was some single family. So anyways, bring this back, and I'd like to make a referral.
Okay, go ahead.
So the referral reading, that the application be referred to staff to receive further information from the proponent regarding a potential townhouse land use for the subject site within the context of the surrounding area with servicing, the road and mobility network, community amenity contribution considerations, and a Latimer Neighborhood Plan Amendment Bylaw for Council's consideration.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Wish to speak to it? Go ahead. Wish to speak to it anymore?
No, I
Good.
just want to see that that whole area more densified than single family.
Great. Is there any other discussion on the referral? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the referral. That carries with Councillor Richter opposed. Item N2, authorization for designated grants, sponsorships, donations, and reserves, report number 23-67. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Martins, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on N2? Seeing none, I'll call the question. That carries unanimously. One, just brought forward for public information from closed meeting. I just want to announce that Councillor Martins, I think you're almost done now with the appointment process to be the Township of Langley's designated appointee to the ECOM Board of Directors. I don't know if you want to speak to it, but if not, just congratulations again, and that process continues to evolve or be completed. Move on to item P1, a notice of motion from myself, 26th Street widening from 80th Avenue to Highway 10. Be it resolved, council directs staff to report to council with a conceptual road widening project plan for 216th Street from 80th Avenue to Highway 10, with options for council to consider, potentially including but not necessarily limited to the cost and design for road widening, potential intersection improvements, active transportation infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists, and impacts to private property, potential impact to the agricultural land reserve, and servicing and third-party utility requirements that may be applicable to include. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Martins. Is there any discussion on P1? Seeing none, I'll call the question on P1. That carries unanimously. And other business, is there any other business? Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through yourself to staff, just if there's the ability, had an inquiry from a resident on if there were any plans to add any signalization or any pedestrian intersection at the intersection of 202 and 83rd. Going east-west, because I believe the school site, park site's been cleared, and so at some point there will be a lot of people trying to get across that street with no current intersection.
Mr. Braggan, do you want to maybe put a memo in the distribution on that? Would that be an
That'd be the
appropriate
best.
solution? Does that work for you, Councillor Pratt? Excellent. Anything else? Councillor Pratt, do you have any other items? Great. I have one item just to mention. The clerk has advised us, Ms. Barr, you've advised us that there are currently no more delegations on the Brookswood neighborhood plans or Horn Pit, and to make a fair process leading up to the public hearing. And I just wondered if you could give just for the record verbally for those here and maybe at home and on record that the reason for that and the process going forward with the understanding that Brookswood neighborhood plans come forward for first and second reading on May 8th.
Yes, that's correct. As per this procedure bylaw, and in order to keep things equal for all stakeholders, with the bylaws coming forward on May 8th, we will then halt any delegation requests regarding the Brookswood neighborhood plans that are coming forward, and Horn Pit as it is rolled up into that. Anything that does come forward, anyone that does wish to speak will always have a written option, but will be directed to either the public meetings that are going to be held or the public hearing, which will be scheduled following first and second reading.
Great. And so the public hearing would be the process to give a verbal submission to
At this
council.
point,
That
it is the public hearing, yes.
And that's the direction that we're headed, presumably for council's consideration on May 8th, subject to there being the need for a public hearing.
Yeah,
That'd be
we're trying to keep the same schedule going forward with everything, so yes.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, get a motion to resolve into special closed. Moved by Councillor Martins. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Rint. I do have one item I'd like to add, which is legal. Is there anybody else? No. Call the question on item Q. That carries unanimously. Get a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Bailey. All those in favor? Opposed? Meeting terminated.